Thanks for coming, everyone, on such an important event. I think it was the one that was #1 in my calendar. When we started putting together the conference, and you know, some fantastic work done by Debbie Kane and the team to actually pull this together. So thanks very much, Debbie, for all the hard work and perseverance in pulling this together. I've just set out what's going to happen over the next hour and a half. I'm going to ask everybody to speak to 5 minutes. It's got 10 on the thing, but I think 10 minutes is a little bit too daunting for some people. I think 5 minutes is enough to get our points across, outline the campaigns, and outline the experiences, and that includes Steve and Andy as well, don't worry. So look, I think today's quite a momentous occasion in the Hillsborough Law campaign. Obviously, we're all waiting in anticipation tomorrow when Stephen Mead is going to announce that it's going to be in the manifesto, and hopefully then Keir Starmer's going to follow that up with a further stamp that it's going to be in the manifesto. So I think that's a magnificent achievement by everybody that's been involved in this from the start. Every single campaigner, every person, every survivor, every family member. But it's not just Hillsborough, there's many other campaigns that are involved in this, which makes it such a powerful movement. And hopefully it'll be in the manifesto, and then also our job starts obviously in October as well, once we get back into Parliament, set up the APPG, because we've still got a government that potentially could be in power for the next 18 months. So it's a really important job of work to be done. For those who don't know me, my name's Ian Byrne, I'm the MP for Liverpool West Derby. I'm also a Hillsborough survivor, and like many who were in this room today, that day shaped the lives of so many people. And what occurred that day at the hands of the state is something which makes this campaign so hugely important. It really does. It was one of the greatest honours of my life to be asked by Andy and Steve to take this forward in Parliament, working with Maria. And obviously, well, I've struggled to put into words, to be honest, when they asked me to do it and reformulate it and push it forward and to get where we are today. But I think I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Steve, Maria and Andy for absolutely everything they've done politically, and others that I won't mention, but they deserve a real round of applause. And I think their hard work politically is the vindication. I only came to this in 2019 when I got elected, so everything that's gone on before, this is down to them. So as I said, I couldn't be prouder to be actually standing here addressing you and being part of this, but there are 3 special people involved in this campaign. We've got an incredible group of people tonight who are going to outline their experiences in different campaigns, how they fought injustice, and it's going to be an emotional night, because anybody that watched the Zoom meeting and heard the bravery of the people on that call, it's breathtaking. It shows you how human spirit can overcome the odds. But we're only, this is a step on the way to where we need to go. The people in this room still need justice, and the Hillsborough now hopefully will be a part of that and ensure they get that. But I think the importance for me, Hillsborough, is when the state does what it does, and it will do again. No being no doubt about that. Sitting there listening to the evidence from Grenfell, listening to the Manchester Arena bombings, listening to the families from COVID, it's the same playbook. And, in June, well in May, some of us were over in Paris. And what happened in Paris, and the aftermath of Paris, was the Hillsborough playbook. The French establishment and UEFA pulled exactly the same tricks again, once more to blame the supporters for their failings. But I think the lessons that we learned from Hillsborough and the lessons that we learned from the campaigns give us such an understanding of what we were going to be faced with and how we could overcome it. So our narrative in the first few days after Paris, and Steve Rotherham deserves a huge amount of credit and everybody involved in that. Neil Atkinson's here as well. There were so many different players who actually started to create the real narrative. And on Saturday, I was so proud to be sitting in an hotel in Liverpool with members of Liverpool Football Union. You know, Dan Austin was there, and we were sitting before the UEFA investigation panel. And what was truly amazing about that was that we were sitting there, and sitting opposite us was Pete Weatherby. Now that is an unbelievable achievement by the pressure that was put on UEFA to ensure that we had people there that actually understood what had happened at Hillsborough, understood other disasters, and could actually bring some sort of... It just felt as though, you know, you had a little bit of confidence in the process. And for a Liverpool supporter, for all of us that have been involved in the Hillsborough campaigns, and there's people here that have done so much towards that, it was a real step forward. It just felt in my heart. I thought, you know what, you've got somebody there that's going to listen. So today is hugely important. Tomorrow is a huge step forward, but there's still a long, long way to go, as we know. So I think tonight, let's just listen to everybody. I want the contributions, what you hear tonight. I want you to take them in, enjoy what you're going to hear. Enjoy it from the aspect of people fighting back against injustice. And that's what I'm usually proud of. That's why I'm usually proud to be standing here tonight. So first of all, I'd like to bring on Andy Byrne.
Thanks, Ian. Evening, everybody. It's actually always humbling and a privilege to be in the company of the families who fought for justice and the survivors like Ian and Steve and all of you here tonight. You have inspired us, to be honest. We're the ones who've been inspired by your fight. And you are going to change this country permanently when this law gets onto that statute book, because it's going to happen. And that's what is so, so inspiring. We obviously come late to it. You were there fighting all of those years. But in the end, I think you already are changing the country, as I'm going to come on to explain. I just wanted to read a list out for you, because I know there are campaigners in this room beyond Hillsborough this evening. So let me just read it out. Nuclear test veterans, Aberfan, thalidomide, Bloody Sunday, Shrewsbury, contaminated blood, Orgreave, Hillsborough, Grenfell. I mean, I read the list because what does it say to you? The pattern keeps repeating, as Ian said. And what it says to me is, it's too easy to cover up in this country. It's too easy to abuse the legal system to set a false narrative, to switch blame, precisely as Ian just described. And it's too hard, far too hard, for ordinary people to fight to establish truth and to get justice. And that's the story of the list that I just read out to you before. But I guess it starts to turn to a more positive, doesn't it? Because this city did fight back. And the fight back is actually beginning to bring the change that this country desperately needs. And actually, I'm sure Margaret won't disagree with me in saying this. It wasn't just this city alone. In advance of the publication of the Hillsborough Independent Panel, Margaret, I think Sue was there, Jenny Hicks, I think came. We went to Derry, didn't we? And we sat down with the families over there. And we learnt from them, didn't we, as to how they'd handled their Truth Day. And we took so much, didn't we, from those families and the way that they'd done it. And they passed their learning on to us. And because of that, we got ready and we understood how to deal with what was coming. And obviously, when the Hillsborough Independent Panel reported, and then we got the inquest, I think what started to happen was it sent a sort of kind of wave of hope around other justice campaigns, people who'd been in the wilderness even longer, believe it or not, who then begun to think, well, maybe we can do something. And we began, Maria, Steve and I, in Parliament, to gather the campaigns together, to say, well, actually, get the power of people working on this together will be what makes the change in the end, and that Hillsborough would become the example that leads to the permanent change not just in that case, but for so many people. And the fight back really, it's happened already in some ways, the beneficial change of what we've done, the fight back. The Shrewsbury 24, I'm not sure if Eileen Turnbull's here this evening, but she and others fought to have those convictions overturned, and they have been overturned now, following the pressure that we put on in Parliament, and we fought back, and the Hillsborough inspiration was used. And look at another example, contaminated blood. Did you see in the summer that they got a £100,000 interim payout? I went to the inquiry, and because of the work on Hillsborough, I was able to then understand what happened to me as Health Secretary. As Health Secretary, I was given a false narrative by the Department of Health as to what happened. They said to me, and they made me put it in letters that I sent out in my name, that nobody was knowingly put at risk. Nobody was knowingly given faulty blood products. But that isn't true. I looked into the papers, as I learnt to do, following what we'd done on Hillsborough, and I found that it wasn't true. And they did know. And they put thousands of people at risk. And because of that, at that public inquiry, I said I believe there is a case for corporate manslaughter charges against the Department of Health. And you know what? When I look at the longest standing injustice of them all on the list I've read out, nuclear test veterans, and it's fantastic to see Susie from the Mirror, who's done so much work to support them, but obviously people representing the veterans and their families, the Lab Rats campaign. You could say the same about the Ministry of Defence. They knowingly put people at risk. People serving our country overseas, no PPE, no consent, no knowledge, they put them into that radiation. And those servicemen suffered, but so have their families ever since. And that one has never been told, and that one is one we're all going to rally around, and you need to know that. So what I'm building to here is, we're going to change the country, aren't we, through this? Because we're not going to have another century where ordinary people are basically shunted out into the wilderness. And the thing is, and I'm sure Margaret, if you're going to speak, Margaret, would back me up on this. It's not just the trauma of what happens to people. It's the re-traumatizing effect of forcing people into the wilderness, making them fight day in, day out, without any support. That's what's so wrong. And it's not just, it is the big disasters, but could everybody welcome Kai Bangbola here this evening, whose son, Zane, died through hydrogen cyanide poisoning in his own home. Have I got that right, Kai? Following a flood in their home in Surrey. Hydrogen cyanide. Kai ended up in a wheelchair. This was no ordinary flood. And yet they still don't know. They've still got all the documents withheld. So it's not just the big things we know about. It's just ordinary people when they come up against those, if you like, those bureaucracies in court. And why can they set false narratives? Number one, there's no obligation on them to tell the truth at the first opportunity. But that is what they should be required to do as public servants, as inconvenient as it might be. That would stop the re-traumatising effect of people who've already been traumatised. A duty of candour in the Hillsborough Law, a duty on all public servants, tell the truth at the first time of asking. That would spare so much grief to so many people. And then to stop the false narratives being set in court, legal parity for bereaved families in inquests where the state is represented. And thanks to Elkin and to Pete Weatherby, who's helped us draft some of these provisions in the Hillsborough Law, that duty of parity, so that families can go in, and rather than being, as the Hillsborough families were, raw with grief at the first inquest, scrabbling round to try and pay for their legal representation, too late, because the authorities had hired the best QCs in the land to set their narrative, and their narrative then was the one that held for so long. That's what continually happens. But also there's Maria's bill with the public advocate, because I certainly know the nuclear test veterans would have found it hard to have an advocate who would work for them, and the contaminated blood families would have found it good to have a public advocate that they could have worked with. So all of these measures, everybody, are in the Hillsborough Law. And you know, we can't ever have a situation anymore, can we, in this country, when an entire English city was crying injustice for 20 years, and it just bounced off the deaf ears. Well, they chose not to hear, didn't they? They chose to ignore. That can never, ever be allowed to happen again. It is time to level up the scales of justice in this country in favour of ordinary people. That is why we need a Hillsborough Law now. We need to see how we've been governed and how we've been policed in the last century. And we need to learn from that and say, no more. No more. The next century in this country is going to be different. Those COVID families, COVID-19 families fighting for justice, they need to have the benefit of a Hillsborough Law as they take their fight forward, and so do those Grenfell families, as they're still battling it out, aren't they, in those courtrooms, and so do Takai and Nicole as they battle for the truth about Zane. These are the changes we need to make so that the next century in this country is different from the last, and we'd never have a situation again where a city like this is treated as second-class citizens. They must be equal in front of the law, and that is why we need a Hillsborough Law now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy. Before I bring Maria on, I just want to say a few thank yous to Debbie Kill Me if I don't. Brody Cantor and Jackson, Avenue HQ, who've helped put this on. The Anfield Wrap, of course, and also the magnificent support we've had from the trade union movement, GMB, FBU, CWU, and without them we couldn't have got where we are today. So I'd like to say thank you to every one of you who have just mentioned there. I want to bring in now Maria the Eagle, who I mentioned before has been unbelievable in the quest for justice right at the very start, and he can tell you all about that. But we want to just touch on, obviously, Maria's Public Accountability Bill, and how it links into what we're trying to do in the Hillsborough Law in its entirety. And I can say, as someone who was elected in 2019, I've learned so much from Maria, and her tenacious, unbelievable, unbending ability to fight the Tories and not get down, because sometimes I don't know how you do it, but she does, she carries on. So Maria the Eagle.
Thanks Ian. It's very easy to fight Tories, in my experience. I want to say a little bit about the Public Advocate Bill, which is part of the Hillsborough Law now. We originally had two different bills, Andy's Public Authorities Accountability Bill, which I was one of the sponsors of, and the Public Advocate Bill. But you put them together, it doesn't matter if it all ends up in the same bill, but you put the measures together, and they're going to make a real difference. What the Public Advocate Bill does is it tries to learn the lessons of the Hillsborough Independent Panel. Now, I'm a lawyer by trade, and I'm very conscious of the fact that by the time I got elected to Parliament in 1997, yes, I've been there 25 years, by the time I got elected to Parliament, every legal proceeding that had happened in the Hillsborough family's fight had gone wrong. It had all gone wrong. And it was no longer possible to fix what had gone wrong through the legal system. And it was only when we developed a process, partly luckily, partly by accident, partly because people like Andy and I were in the right places at the right time in government, it was only when we developed a non-legal process, the Hillsborough Independent Panel, that relied on transparency, on freedom of information, and on the stopping public authorities from hiding documents. It was only when we did that that the full truth came out about Hillsborough. But look how long it took. Look how long it took. And it wasn't as if the truth about Hillsborough was not known. Because as those of you remember the public inquiry, the first public inquiry, no, Lord Justice Taylor got it substantially right. He was wrong about things like the response of the emergency services, but he got it substantially right about where the fault lay with the Hillsborough disaster within 4 months of the disaster happening in his interim report. But what we then saw was the systematic undermining and destruction of the findings of that public inquiry by the police, who were in fact responsible. And that was done by them with impunity. It was done by them to protect their own reputation. It was done by them to try and prevent themselves from having to pay out compensation through the civil courts. It was done by them to try and stop the officers responsible from having to be being held accountable. And we're still seeing it now. It is still happening, even after the Hillsborough Independent Panel made it quite clear. The Prime Minister of the day apologised to the Hillsborough families and survivors for the way in which they've been treated, for the cover-up, for the way in which public authorities had behaved. But because families and campaigners then had to shut up publicly whilst the prosecutions happened, it's given them a chance, and we've all seen it, to reinstitute their narrative about, oh, it was the fans really, it was the fans really. And we've gone backwards in that respect. For 5 years while the second effort at public prosecutions went on, which ultimately failed, because of the passage of time as much as anything, and because of the people who were charged and the charges that were made, but substantially because it's 33 years. It's given them a chance to try again to change the narrative, and they are doing. We saw what happened when the prosecutions failed. The defence barristers were still straight out there saying, oh, it's the fans' fault, really. The chants we still hear at grounds around the Premier League about what really happened. So we have got to, my conclusion immediately at that time was, we have got to stop these things going wrong in the first place. Yes, a duty of candour. That is a damn good idea. But lying liars are going to lie. So we have to have more than just the duty of candour. It's going to be helpful. It's going to be helpful if that's wrong, if they get caught out lying. But we need more. Equality of arms at inquests where they become adversarial, absolutely. And the Justice Select Committee in this Parliament, of which I'm a member, has come up with has substantially supported those ideas that are in the Hillsborough Law. But I also think, let's learn the lessons of the Hillsborough Independent Panel. Transparency at an early stage. The reason it took so long for that report to come out, and so many documents had to be looked through by the panel, was the passage of time, the fact that it took so many years for the panel to be set up. So what if there was a right from an early stage for those caught up in disasters to have those documents at an early stage? Transparency immediately, if the families want it. And the families have to have agency, because one of the most awful things about the Hillsborough families' ordeal is that they, at the worst time of their lives, suddenly found things being done to them by everybody else, and they didn't have any capacity to have an input. So the public advocate bill gives families the right to demand a Hillsborough panel type process with full transparency of documentation at an early stage. Let's torpedo these cover-ups from the start. Stop things going wrong in the first place, because that is what will make a difference. And then the duty of candour and the equality of arms will do the rest. So, this is an essential reform. Now, I've been making speeches in Parliament about the Hillsborough families, what really happened and what needs to happen, for 24 and a half years. The first speech I made was in 1998 after the publication of Stuart Smith, which we won't talk about, the Stuart Smith inquiry, the Stuart Smith scrutiny as it was then called. But Margaret reminded me of the speech earlier today. 24 and a half years. I mean, I had an involvement with Hillsborough families before I became an MP as a junior lawyer. working for Brian Thompson and Partners in Liverpool, I had some knowledge of the civil litigation that went on at the very start. And all this time later, I am still banging my head against a brick wall in Parliament, trying to get the Public Advocate Bill through. I introduced it in the Commons in 2016. Michael Wills introduced it in the Lords, and he substantially wrote the bill in 2014. We have both been introducing it ever since. I have met almost every Justice Minister, and there's been a lot of them, in the last 6 months, in the last few years, behind the scenes, to avoid any embarrassment, to get them to just look at it sensibly. They've all said, oh yeah, really, really good, Maria. I quite like that idea, Maria. And then they've all either got sacked or resigned. So I think maybe I should see Liz Truss next. Finish her off for good. The point is, they've said, oh, it looks good, and we like it, there's this little problem. They've not done anything about it. We still haven't had a response to Bishop James Jones's 2017 report, which was commissioned by Theresa May, into the lessons to be learned from Hillsborough. Now, when the trials collapsed last July, we got a debate in the Commons, and Ian made a rather memorable contribution to it, as I recall. We had the debate in the Commons in September last year. I was promised by the then Minister, Alex Chalk, God knows what he's doing now, he's probably been in 3 or 4 different departments. Yeah, he resigned. Well, a lot of them resigned and then got reappointed again, didn't they? But, I mean, he promised me at the dispatch box that we would have a response to Bishop James's report, and they did a consultation on a public advocate type role. We'd have a response by last Christmas. So I'm getting a bit fed up of listening to what these Tories say. So as far as I'm concerned, getting this stuff into the Labour manifesto, getting this stuff as a high priority for an incoming Labour government, and there will be a lot to do for an incoming Labour government. But this is important. The legislation's written. It's substantially there. We know what needs doing. We know what the importance of it is. We know that it will avoid a hell of a lot of cost over the years that the state has to pay at the moment for all these never-ending legal proceedings. Let's stop it from going wrong in the first place. Let's make sure that families affected through no fault of their own have the capacity, have agency, can find out what they need to find out, can get the truth out there, and then we can avoid all these disasters going wrong for so long, 33 years and more, and the families and survivors are still having the same rubbish said about what really happened. No more. If the law isn't for this, what is it for? We must change it. I'm not going to stop till it gets changed, I can tell you. 25 years, maybe next year, maybe the year after we'll get it done with your help. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maria. And right, so I'm going to ask Stevie Rotherham to come on now and talk about his experience in Paris and what he experienced, and obviously the connection to the Hillsborough Law, which I touched on before, but Steve's got an awful lot to say about that, and I know he's going to be hugely influential in getting the justice what we need for Paris as well. So Steve Rotherham.
Thanks, Ian. 2 brilliant contributions, but in all honesty, you wouldn't want any of those politicians to be timing a soft-boiled egg for you, would you? So I'll try and be as brief as I possibly can. On the 15th of April 1989, I walked away from a football match. I was a 20-odd-year-old bricklayer, felt absolutely powerless what I'd witnessed, and then a few days later, even more so, when the lies and the smears came out. And all we could do is support people that we know. I was from Kirby. There were people from my area who unfortunately I knew who didn't survive, and That's all we could really do. The 28th of May, I think it was, this year, I walked away from a football stadium absolutely emboldened with the lessons that had been learned, that we wouldn't let the false narrative take hold like it did all those years previously. And that's because of all the campaigning, not in all honesty by us, but by ordinary people, many of them who will never know the names of. Many Liverpool supporters who did things behind the scenes, but headed up, it has to be said, by some brilliant spokespeople, including Margaret Aspinall, for the families. And I look at some of the other campaigns that are associated with this. I didn't know about the truth about Zane until we had the event, and I heard the contribution from his dad, and it's still going on. To this day, it's still going on. The government, first of all, obfuscate, don't they? Then they try to throw up some smokescreen. Then they try to detract people from doing stuff. And then they try to eke it out as long as they possibly can so that most of them people go away. And that's what's happened with the nuclear test veterans. So we've learned lessons, I think, on behalf of so many people. So many campaigns and campaigners now are in a better position because of what we've collectively done. And that's why we definitely need a Hillsborough Law now.
That was short and succinct, that wasn't it? Right, now I'm going to ask a man who probably everybody in this room usually respects. He's an absolute diamond in this city, and I think that was reflected last week when he's going to get the freedom of the city of Liverpool. Extremely well deserved, and I was absolutely delighted with seeing that. So I want to bring up Elkin Abrahams.
I was going to talk about why we need a Hillsborough Law, but this has all been covered, so I'd like to start with thanks. First of all, we have our new Fab Four over here, and thanks to all of them for all the work they've done. And then there are so many people in this room who have been victims of injustice and have not lied down to take it, who have fought for years and in some cases decades, and some people who are just starting the long fight, the COVID bereaved as well. And without those people, nothing could have been achieved. And the fact that we've now reached a stage where the Labour Party is formally adopting Hillsborough Law is such a significant milestone and such a tribute to all those people who have not given up the fight. And I'd really like to thank you for inspiring the MPs and for inspiring me as well to do the bit that we can do on our part to continue with this fight. Unfortunately, the Labour Party isn't in power at the moment, so getting it on the Labour Party books isn't the end yet. We have to persuade other parties, or wait for a week or two for the Labour Party to come into power. Hopefully the latter. A few points I'd like to make about why it's still needed. We've spoken about Hillsborough, and you may or may not know that the Hillsborough Independent Panel published on a website its conclusions, but also all the documentation and all the evidence that led it to its conclusions, which was 500,000 pages or so. The Hillsborough Inquest, the new round of Hillsborough Inquest, put on their website transcripts of all the proceedings, documents that were referred to in those proceedings. So a whole compendium of information explaining why the jury reached the decision they did. As soon as the criminal prosecution started, all those documents were taken down so as not to prejudice the criminal process. Have they been put back up again? No, they haven't. So the process of rewriting history requires deleting history as well, and that's what's been happening. And there's another little fight to take place over getting these documents back into the public domain. The other point I was going to make was particularly about the COVID bereaved, who are just starting their fight for justice. And we already see a pattern emerging of all the public bodies circling the wagons, protecting their own interests, looking for other parties to blame, and for the interests of the bereaved being overlooked in this process. We're only just approaching the first preliminary hearing on this, but we can see, sadly, yet again, the same fight having to take place. And why is it? You've heard a lot about why we need the Hillsborough Law. There's a culture in our big organisations to protect each other, and you can understand to a point why that culture exists, especially in the organisations like the police, like the army, that face the most danger, because it's vital that people in those organisations put their colleagues first. The problem is when we foster that culture, we don't say you put your colleagues first up to a point. And a point comes where if they're breaching human rights, you shouldn't continue protecting them. And there is a battle to change that culture. And it's not just a matter of enacting law. Laws do a lot, but they don't do everything. And I think we each as individuals need to do our bit to change the culture within organisations so that people learn that protecting your colleagues only goes up to a certain point. And if you go beyond that point, we as a society pay an enormous price. So that's me done. I get paid by the hour, so I'm only allowed. I'd just like to repeat my thanks to everyone here who supported Hillsborough Law.
We've heard a lot about Hillsborough now, and obviously our personal experiences, and part of this campaign, it's such a wide scope, and you know, Elton touched on the need for this, for the COVID inquiry, which is the next big one coming up, and we had them discussions with the COVID families, but also it's usually important to have other campaigns for justice, and you hear about them, and you understand them. And I think I want to bring Kai over now to talk about Zane, because I think a lot of people have first heard about this through the Zooms that we've had. I've been absolutely horrified about what Kai and his family have had to go through, fighting for justice for his son. So I'm going to give the mic to Kai now to outline his campaign for justice. Back in there.
Well, thank you very much. I wasn't expecting to be asked to speak, and when I came in, you probably noticed that I was the only one that was soaked. But remember, after a shower, the sun can come out and we get these rainbows. And Zane would want me to thank everybody that is here for all of their support to get us so far, because we as campaigns can't do this alone. This is everybody's fight. Now, there's two key messages that I would like to hand today. And one is that anybody that's aware of Zane's campaign, please keep supporting. We really do need the support of people in various places and also the public. My second message, as I came in, Andy asked me, he said, I've prepared something for you. Now that was because on Zane's 16th birthday, and Zane was killed when he was 7. This is little Zane, and Zane's dad. He was only 7. And on what would have been Zane's 16th birthday, the 21st of October 2022, we will be going to number 10 to deliver a 111,000 person petition in order to get Zane an independent panel inquiry. And for a third of the time that Maria has been in Parliament, we've had to fight for justice for Zane. Because the message that they gave on the very day that Zane died was the message that they wanted you to remember. This little boy died from Chertsey, died of carbon monoxide poisoning. And that was the message from number 10 Downing Street, handed to Sky, the BBC, and other outlets in order to persuade everybody here that this is what happened to this little boy. Whereas on the very day, they knew that it was hydrogen cyanide detected multiple times in our home. And that hydrogen cyanide, as well as other detections they looked for carbon monoxide, there was none. So it was absolutely deliberate. Immediately, Nicole, my wife, had tried to resuscitate Zane. I was in the other room unconscious. So I wasn't able to help Nicole. So if anyone did see Christian Eriksen when he collapsed on the football pitch, well, that was my wife trying to help her 7-year-old son to recover. And immediately after Zane had died in hospital, the police started interrogating my wife, trying to persuade her that there was carbon monoxide, when they knew absolutely from multiple readings that hydrogen cyanide, which is a gas, a chemical weapon of mass destruction that was found in our home to infuse our home, we've got all the readings, and it was used in World War II in order to kill people in gas chambers, millions of people. That was in our home. It's invisible and odourless. Now, when we come to the issue of how will we treat it, now, and this was during flooding, by the way, and the flooding got to our home via landfill that was secret landfill. And that secret landfill had chemicals within it that the hazmat determined had infused our home. So, what did they do to us in terms of candour, truth? Well, they ran to attack us, as I've just said, with my wife, immediately under interrogation. They have never come along and supported us. What they went on to do is the following. The now discredited inquest was an absolute sham, where we and Zane were denied legal aid for representation, where 5 authorities that were against us received public money and legal aid, including the coroner. We were denied any proper investigation of the facts, the evidence and the data surrounding Zane's death. We were stripped of Article 2, which is human rights. Zane was denied a jury. We were denied witnesses, and we were denied evidence. So when you look at what happened, imagine all of that firepower against one child. So candour and parity in terms of funding was non-existent in Zane's case, and we, as the victims, were put on trial. Now, the whole story of the little boy from Chertsey that came through the state, through the Cabinet Office, was clearly positioned because, I'm going back to everybody here, there is many injustices, but there's one struggle. So I call for all people that are here to support the various campaigns. I also call upon that we should all be able to speak truth to power. Don't worry, I'll pick them up. We should all be able to speak truth to power and be heard whenever these injustices occur. Hillsborough makes clear that the truth is imperative in order that others can be protected and justice be served. The patronising disposition and disgrace of unaccountable power is neither confined to Hillsborough or to the past. We call on the Labour Party and cross parties to drive forward a comprehensive Hillsborough law. Now, I'm going to go because others need to speak, but I want you to know that Zane, an 80-year-old person, said of Zane, he's the most compassionate person that he's ever met, an 80-year-old person. Zane was an advocate for sustainability and the environment. He set up his school's environmental team across the junior school and senior team. Zane said that people think that sustainability and matters of the environment are about tidying up their garden, but it's actually, when he was interviewed, he was talking about the importance of people looking after the world. And he said, actually, sustainability is about looking after a bigger garden, and that bigger garden is the world. So hear the words of the various people here, hear this little boy, and support us to get justice for him and protect others. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai. Inspiring, but so sad. I'm going to bring up Emily Spurrell now, Police and Crime Commissioner, Liverpool City Region, to talk about what she believes should happen next regarding the police.
Yes, hi everyone. I feel hugely humbled to be standing here today. I mean, not least after what we've just heard, but also just all the testimonies that we've heard from my political colleagues who have been working on this for, you know, as Maria said, for decades. So, so I'm here very much to kind of offer my support really with what I can do. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Merseyside. Merseyside knows how important the Hillsborough Law is. We can never get to the same situation where we're seeing families suffer after suffering the ultimate loss and then be forced to fight tirelessly for justice. We know that when those are in power look for others to blame, they add to that untold pain to victims. When those responsible put their efforts into denying fault instead of learning from mistakes, they put future families at risk. Now, Labour PCCs, we are in full support of the duty of candour that is called for in the Hillsborough Law, and we continue to say that publicly as well. Our main job is to hold Chief Constables to account and make sure that they deliver a better service for the public that they serve. And actually the Chief Constables have also, they support it. They are on board. They say they want to support a duty of candour and they are committed to ensuring that their officers maintain the highest standards. But I think the reason we need this duty of candour is because we can't rely on that. We can't rely on the goodwill of Chief Constables making sure their officers do what they are supposed to do. We have to make sure, Elkin talked about it before, that cultural change. We've got to make it absolutely clear that telling the truth, being honest, owning your mistakes and learning from them, that is the culture that we want to see within policing and all of our public services. And we know that justice will always be an uphill struggle when public servants and public bodies are allowed to hide evidence. So a duty of candour for me, I think, will help to balance the scales. We've heard it a few times before. The legal aid, the advocates, it's about making sure that the justice system works for ordinary people, which right now it is simply failing to do. I really hope that the bill, and I really hope we get that support. We've already heard it from Kia and colleagues in the party. I hope we get a Labour government and see this bill come to Parliament, and hopefully that we will avoid families like many of you in the room today having to fight as hard for justice as you have had to get to where we are. As far as I'm concerned, I think the bill is calls for human decency, and it's what we would expect from anybody who is in a job that serves the public. So very proud to support the campaign. As I say, incredibly proud of the work of my colleagues and all of the families and survivors in the room today. So yeah, happy very to support.
Now it's a great pleasure to welcome Steve Pearce, from these nuclear test veterans who have aired on Zoom many occasions, so powerful. Over to you, Steve.
Hi, good evening. I'm here to tell you about a scandal that has been a stain on this country's history books for 70 years. Monday marks the 70th anniversary of the first British nuclear weapon test. The 22,000 service personnel that have been involved in those tests ever since have never received justice for what happened to them. I'm going to tell you about two cases. The first is a man I admire incredibly called John Morris, who witnessed four of these nuclear detonations as an 18-year-old conscript sent to Christmas Island without choice. He describes so powerfully the effect of witnessing these bombs. It would make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. He described his whole body boiling. And as has been mentioned before, there was a lack of PPE. What he was dressed in, along with all his colleagues, was a short sleeve shirt, a pair of shorts, sunglasses. How close do you think is safe? to be near a nuclear explosion. Him and his colleagues were 8 miles and made to watch. It knocked them off their feet. Now, these men apparently do not deserve a medal. In 2018, we asked for a medal for these men. And in 2020, the government came back and said, there's not enough risk involved. Now, let that sink in. 8 miles from a nuclear explosion as not being risky. If they're that safe, why are they a weapon? Now, we know the MOD was aware of the effects, and we are aware of what they wanted, because we have uncovered documents that allude to the fact they wanted to see the effect of radiation on equipment and personnel. They were using these men as guinea pigs. They also had blood tests and urine tests. Can we get hold of them? No. They exist, we know they exist, but the MOD consistently refuses to give us access. I am trying to fight for my dad's blood tests at the moment, and I'm not getting very far, but I'm not going to give up. When John came home, he settled down with his wife, and when he was 24, he had a son. And at 4 months old, the child died. Well, he went to see him in the morning, and in his cot, he died. Now that's a tragedy, we all agree with that. But it was compounded by the fact that when he was at the hospital with his son, the police arrested him and his wife for murder. That was since been rescinded, and they just said it was a cot death. John didn't believe this, because they also said it was pneumonia, and he said that child was not ill when I put him to bed. It's took him 60 years to get the coroner's report. 60 years, which proves that he had a lung condition. It wasn't pneumonia. His lungs had not developed properly, and John has blamed himself for that ever since. Now, John's story is not unusual, and I can tell you my story. My dad served at Maralinga in South Australia. When he was there, they conducted something called the minor trials, and these were basically reckless experiments where they were trying to discover what would happen if you blew up plutonium with conventional explosives. What would the dispersal be like? Basically creating nuclear accidents. And my dad's protective gear, pretty much the same as John's. Now, yes, the sand was contaminated, but the only safety measure was a single strand wire fence, supposedly separating the contaminated area from the non-contaminated area. This is a desert, it's windy, the sand blows. It gets in your hair, gets in your face, gets in your food, gets in your water, gets in your vehicle, gets in your bed. This sand was contaminated with alpha radiation. These men were soaked in alpha radiation. This is the radiation the government never tested for. Alpha radiation is the one that if you ingest it, it damages your DNA. Now, Dad came home, and 10 years later I come along. Visibly, something's not right. Now, apart from the short stature, I was born with hydrocephalus, lumbar lordosis, which is going through the spine, and the leg bent 45 degrees the wrong way. Now, my short stature is undiagnosable. There's 200 forms of known short stature. Mine is unique. All they can tell me is it's a genetic mutation, no one else like it in the world. And this is not unusual because of the 155,000 descendants of the service personnel, a lot of them have unique illnesses or extremely rare illnesses. And they are 10 times more likely to have birth defects than the average person in society. Their wives and children also have a highly elevated miscarriage rate. The health effects are unbelievable. But it doesn't just affect first generation, second generation descendants. It's going to damage the DNA for 500 years. So this problem, although the MOD likes to think there's only about 1,500 veterans left, we can wait, the problem will go away, it won't. Because every year, children are being born to descendants, and there's health defects. It's a scandal. They refuse to do any research. They refuse to acknowledge or even recognise the service that these men gave. It's thanks to them that we have a nuclear deterrent. Whether we agree with it or not, the government like our nuclear deterrent. They like it so much, but they refuse to give any recognition to the men who went out there, did the tests, and got it sorted. It's a disgrace. Now, Hillsborough Law would help us because it would help us get our records. It would stop the MOD lying. We know for a fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the medal situation where they were basically told there was no risk involved. The medal committee is supposed to be independent. It was taking advice from the MOD. And guess what the MOD said? So don't give them. So they did. It's a scandal. They're not independent. It needs reviewing. So Hillsborough Law would give us access to the truth. The state took our health. We just want the truth. We want the records. We want to know what happened. We want the research. And those men, all they've asked for is a bit of tin, a medal. Give it them. It's not a hard ask. But most of all, do it for the descendants as well. Because there's children that aren't born yet. I always swore I would never have a child. I would never pass on my genetic damage to a child. But a few years ago, I met an amazing lady. She's now my wife. And we had a child. But I've always felt bad because I feel I've played genetic Russian roulette with his life. And that, even through pregnancy, terrified me. At the scans, I was constantly asking the radiographer, are the limbs short? Does it look okay? Is there anything wrong whatsoever? And it just, until I saw him, I was just, and that should be a joyous time. And it wasn't, it was just time of worry for me. Thankfully, he's perfect. He's 17 months old on Sunday, and he's amazing. But the worry doesn't stop there, because a lot of the illnesses suffered by the descendants happen in adolescence, and a lot of them are things like cancer. So I've got this worry that in 5, 10, 15 years' time, he ain't going to be ill. And I don't want to think that me and my dad killed my son, because that's what it would be. And until we get the research, we won't know how to help them. We want him to be able to go to the doctor and say, I've got this problem. My grandfather was at the nuclear test, and that should set off a process. There is no process. You go to the doctor now, you mention nuclear tests, they'll say, what tests? Nobody knows about them. So we need education as well. There's a whole raft of things we need. But Hillsborough Law would give us a start. It would give us access to the truth. And that's the starting point. I'd like to thank you all for listening to me today.
Thanks, Steve. Just shows you the importance of what we're trying to do here. And I think the statements, we just want the truth, should resonate right throughout this land. I want to bring Lynn up now from COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice, just to outline the importance of the upcoming inquiries and what she's going to be fighting for, because she'll be fighting for 200,000 people that have died through COVID. Lynn.
Very real privilege to speak with you all today. The Hillsborough Law is incredibly important to me for two very personal reasons. None of us in this city will ever forget that day when we started hearing the news of what was going on that pitch in Hillsborough. I remember the phone lines were stuck and we couldn't get through to find out any news of our loved ones. It took ages. We were lucky, we thought, because we got the news that my very dear friend was in hospital in Sheffield. But what we witnessed over the next decades, the lies, the injustice, and the pain on top of the already unbearable grief is what's not fair. Any decent person would want justice for that, and you didn't need to have lost anyone to feel that way. My friend fought for his life for as long as the Hillsborough families have been fighting. Well, he lost his battle because that friend was Andrew Devine, who became the 97th victim of unlawful killing in this city on that fateful day. And the pain and loss and injustice permeates every inch of this city. We all know that. The second personal reason is the way my lovely dad died in March 2020. He'd gone into the Royal Liverpool Hospital for a foot operation, just an operation on his toe, and there were a few complications, so they had to keep him in. And we started to get worried because we were listening to what was happening in other countries. We were starting to listen to what the doctors were saying in Italy, listening to the warnings, you need to lock down, look, we're overwhelmed. But of course, not everybody in our country would listen. On the 19th of March, our then Prime Minister announced we in the UK were going to beat coronavirus in 12 weeks. We decided to stop visiting our dad because we were petrified we were going to take the virus into him, but it was too late. By the time lockdown eventually came, we were begging to be allowed to go in and visit him, but we were denied that right. My dad died alone on a ward in the Royal Liverpool Hospital one Sunday morning, yet another day where time stood still and it will always be ingrained in my mind forever. But I knew my dad's death felt different. The denial of normal grieving, the denial of our right to go and be with people, and the denial of mourning rituals after, coupled with the way he died, knowing that we should have locked down earlier just felt incredibly wrong. So when I discovered the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group, I realised I wasn't the only one who felt betrayed by the system. I'm a professor at the University of Liverpool and I happen to research palliative and end-of-life care and bereaved services. So I felt compelled to do a piece of research and I interviewed a lot of the bereaved families. And over the years, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of bereaved families and I have never come across grief like this. At the time when I did the interviews, we were still fighting for a public inquiry, and what came through from the research was the importance of fairness and justice, and the real fear that it wasn't going to be fair when it didn't come. Time and again, people mentioned Hillsborough. Those families have been fighting for 30 years. Is that what we're going to have to face? And they were worried it was going to be a whitewash. Has that whitewash already begun? The chair of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, she assured us the bereaved families will be central to our inquiry. And yet only last week we've heard through The Guardian that the families are only going to get to tell their stories through a third-party market research company. And some of those companies that are bidding for the contract worked with the government on their COVID communications. Oh, God help us. And so it begins. The families are now feeling the extra layers of hurt and betrayal on top of the grief. On top of the narrative we've already had to endure. Well, it's okay because they were only old, or they were weak, or they were sick anyway. But as if they were collateral damage, but they were all old or sick or weak, and none of them were collateral damage. But we've been told, let's move on, let's get back to normal. Politicians already referring to the COVID vaccine as a success in this country, instead of the COVID deaths, which currently stand at 207,000 people, many of which were preventable. Our loved ones were not collateral damage. But we had to endure the let the bodies pile high narrative, and already the narrative is about let's move on, let's have parties while the bodies pile high. And then we can just lie about having the parties, can't we? Because that's the culture in this country. So many of the bereaved families feel helpless, and that lack of control, the lack of power, it's so incredibly disabling, and the system is so unfair, as we've already heard today. So the system has to change, and the people who lie and lie and lie again can't be allowed to carry on. But the COVID-19 families are terrified they're going to become the next Hillsborough families, fighting for years and years and years. So the Hillsborough Law would really help us to avoid that. So we're glad to be part of the Hillsborough Law Now coalition. Hillsborough Law is not just a reflection on the past, but a promise for the future. That the injustices and cover-ups that have hurt so many people will be prevented. And that's something we're fighting for. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ben. Next I want to bring up Charlotte Hennessy, a Hillsborough campaigner and a good friend of mine. Big round of applause for Charlotte.
Not gonna lie, my anxiety is through the roof right now. But this is what I do. I get a little bit nervous and I get a little bit, but just bear with me. I am very conscious that there are a lot of people in the room who are affected by mental trauma. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a heads up that some of what I'm going to say is triggering, but it's my reality and it's my truth and my dad's truth. And I can't support Hillsborough Law without sharing the truth. So, for those of you that don't know, my name's Charlotte and I'm the daughter of Jimmy Hennessy, who was killed at Hillsborough when I was 6. For 23 years, official documents and those who had a professional role within public authority misled me to believe that my dad was killed as a result of traumatic asphyxiation. I was always told that my dad was dead by 3:15, and I was always told that his injuries were irreversible. But other Hillsborough family members knew that that wasn't the truth. The cause of death and the irreversible brain injuries were made up on my dad's pathology report. So when my dad was in that morgue, they lied about the state that his body was in. They lied within his recorded death, and there was no thought for people like me who would one day potentially come along and want to know what happened to their dad. So, in 2012, when the Hillsborough Independent Panel report was released, I learned that the level of deception by those within public authority was much worse than I could have prepared myself for. My dad had actually been found alive on the pitch by a police officer who did nothing wrong. He did his job on that day. My dad raised his arm, he opened his eyes, he responded, and the police officer took my dad to the gym where he believed that my dad would get medical help. But by the time my dad got to the gym, he was becoming unconscious. He was placed in the top right-hand corner and he was left there on the floor. 2 other police officers came along and they put my dad in a body bag. In 2015, after speaking with Operation Resolve, one of those police officers decided to confess that when they opened the body bag to identify the person within it, he'd vomited, and he described him as very hot and sweaty. So they searched my dad, and they put him back inside, and they zipped him back up. In 2016, The inquest concluded that my dad's cause of death was actually inhalation of copious amounts of stomach content. Those police officers refused to give evidence at my dad's inquest on the grounds that their mental health was too bad. I tried to be compassionate to that because I get it. I struggle with mental health myself, and I really genuinely do. I get it. We make mistakes, but that wasn't a mistake. There were questions that I needed to be answered so that I could recover with my mental health. I have mental health too. But they refused to answer me even on a personal level. We can't forget that there were South Yorkshire ambulance senior officers there at that ground, and they did nothing more than walk along those perimeter fences, listening as close as you are to me right now, to people screaming for their lives, and they did nothing. They stepped over people. Probably one of them was my dad because he was behind the goal. And they tended to someone who had a broken leg. There is no law to protect people like me. I've had to rely on family members like Margaret and Sue, Anne Williams, the Hicks family, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be standing here now with the answers that I do have. We're now in 2022, 33 years have passed, and the level of deception and the depth of the cover-up still trickles through society and into younger generations. Social media is rife with people who are fed lies, and that quite simply is because the law allows it. People can do whatever they want. The law allows it. I'm very vocal on social media. It's a brilliant way of raising awareness. I think that the people who have fought for 33 years should be allowed to rest now and enjoy their time with their families. I was very grateful to enjoy my childhood and my teen years, but I will not stand by whilst Hillsborough families are slandered on the internet, and that is exactly what is happening right now. And I'll share just a couple of tweets that I've been sent lately. Imagine having a death certificate that says your dad was crushed by a fence. Embarrassing. So tell me, Charlotte, was your dad drunk when he contributed to his own death? And most recently, just 41 minutes after it was announced that Her Majesty the Queen had passed away, the Hillsborough Survivors Support Group and myself were specifically tagged in a tweet that said, "Has the Queen met the 97 ticketless Scousers yet?" People have these opinions because nobody has been held accountable for their wrongdoings at Hillsborough. That's the fact. Hillsborough ultimately was caused by that catastrophic order to open those gates by David Duckenfield. And it took 14 minutes for that lie to fall out of his mouth to Graham Kelly, who was an FA official, and he went, "Oh, the fans have stormed the gates." CCTV proved from that day that that didn't happen. Witness statements proved that that didn't happen. How did it take 25 years for David Duckenfield to sit in a courtroom and then go, "Oh, well, I might have omitted a few things"? And one thing that absolutely riles me is that he didn't just make those omissions that he then admitted to. He sat in a courtroom full of family members who had been on his tail for all those years. And then he tried to get one back up on them, and I will never forget it. It was a Friday afternoon. He was coming to the end of his evidence. He was very aware that the Hillsborough Family Support Group was sat right behind him. His witness box was there. The Hillsborough Family Support Group was sat right behind him. And then there were family members sat in front of him. And he could see us all. He knew where we all were. So he makes his admissions, and he says what he did, and he's sorry, and he was monotone, and none of it meant anything. But then what he did was, he said, "Mom, I cannot tell you how sorry I would feel if I found my child on a cold and dirty floor." And he put those mums and those dads and those family members right back in that gymnasium. And he did that by choice, because he's a horrible man. He didn't need to say anything else. He'd already made his admissions. He didn't need to put those mums. And do you know what absolutely riled me even more is the following Sunday. It was Mother's Day, and he knew exactly what he was doing. So, I'm going to leave you with, very grateful to the family members and the survivors and the campaigners that have fought on my behalf when I was too small to. And I know that it's a little bit of a further ask for other people to come forward and join within this campaign, but it really does help. It really works. We can't let our family members die in vain. We can't let people like little Zane. How gorgeous was little Zane? We can't allow this to happen. He was a baby. What Steve's going through, it's terrible, feeling guilty for having a child. No, I'm sorry, but no, we can't do this anymore. And unless we all start to make a stand, those within public authority, they'll just carry on, because they think we're a walkover. But actually, we're not, because I've been brought up by Hillsborough mums and Hillsborough dads and campaigners, and I'm not going anywhere.
Charlotte, because I know how much that takes out of you. Well done. And I think what Charlotte just outlined there with the social media elements, I think that's why what we're trying to do with the Real True Legacy project about education is usually key. And I think that's something which we'll be battling for over the next 12 months. And no, thanks very much to Steve Rodden for their support and that, and everybody that's behind that campaign. Really important moving forward. I'm just going to bring Peter Scarf in now. He's going to talk about the survivors of Hillsborough. And the effect that's had, so he's going to give us a few minutes on the importance of Hillsborough Law for the survivors as well. Talk about nervous and anxious. I've not prepared anything. I wasn't expecting to be speaking, to be honest. We're not campaigners. Hillsborough Survivor Support Alliance is about helping people get therapy and overcome the trauma that they've been through. We've sent many for therapy on a very, very high success rate. But the problem with social media, as it's just been spoken about before, we have to deal with this ourselves. We have to deal with people who've been re-traumatised by some of the hate tweets that are out there. This year alone, we've had 3 suicides. That's 3 too many. 3 too many. One was just before the anniversary, because he didn't want to face another anniversary. 2 of them are re-triggers from Stade de France. What these people are going through, the hate comments that are getting made to the likes of Charlotte, other family members, and Hillsborough survivors, it's beyond a joke. It's just unbelievable. It's re-triggering people, it's traumatising them, and people are taking their own lives. The 3 that we know about are the only ones that we actually know about. There's probably many more. Since I started working on it with HSA, we've saved people's lives. We've saved people from trying to take their own lives. We've put people through therapy to prevent anyone taking their own lives. And we're still picking up the pieces. Stade de France was it was a remodel of Hillsborough. It was planned. It was definitely planned. The bottlenecking, you name it, everything. Steve was there. He experienced it as well. We've had to put people through therapy from Stade de France. We led it, and the foundation funded it, which is Pool FC Foundation, which is fantastic, because we don't have that kind of money to be able to keep paying for more and more people from other prevented tragedies. We shouldn't be doing this. It shouldn't be happening. I listen to everyone else who's been talking about different cover-ups. They're all validated, they're all pieces of this jigsaw puzzle, and we need to do it together. We need to push for this Hillsborough Law now. It's not just about Hillsborough, it's about everybody else, every other injustice. Sorry, I'm going to cut it short because I'm not good at this at all. But thanks for giving me
Peter's absolutely spot on. You know, so many people were triggered after Stade de France, and my dad as well. I remember sitting the day we had a meeting in the church pub for people that were there, and there was just so many faces who we all know. We were all who were just in a really, really bad way, and I think that's why we need to fight for justice for the Stade de France as well, to make sure our name's cleared, because that'll make an awful lot of people rest easier, and it's massively important. So we've come to the end now, and I don't think I can think of somebody more fitting than to close this than a woman that doesn't really need me to say anything really. So I'd just like to welcome Marcus Aspinall.
Well, really, I'm only here to put you all to sleep. No, joking apart, how do I follow all them speakers? Each and every one of them deserve truth, justice and accountability. But that's what's been part of the family support group, is to make sure that a thing like Hillsborough never ever happens again. We know this country now, at the moment in time, is in a right mess. It's in an absolute mess, and I just hope that if the Labour Party get in, they do an awful lot to straighten what's gone wrong. But hopefully, a Hillsborough Law will maybe be the start of it. That's what's so important. For the simple reason, why do we want to legacy? I think Charlotte done a very good job there of explaining what happened to her as an individual, to her dad. Each and every individual family had the same story. So it wasn't just about Charlotte's dad, it's about all of them 97. I got told my son died the same as Charlotte by 3:15. At the last inquest in 2012, that finished in 2016, my son was one of them that could have been saved. I only found that out at the very last inquest. Why it's important for all of you to back this Hillsborough Law, and I'm very grateful to know the likes of Maria, Steve, Andy Burnham, a lot of our MPs have backed the families for many, many years, but also there was a lot that I did not trust. I'm a person who will tell the truth. I will not lie about anything. And to me, when I was meeting with some MPs, and I will start off, and I'm not ashamed to say it, I was disgusted when we got what Maria mentioned earlier on, the scrutiny. The Stuart Taylor inquiry was a disgrace. That was given to us by one of the Labour MPs. And to me, it was a bloody disgrace. But I've also got to thank also somebody from the Conservative Party. And please don't think I'm Conservative, I'm not. But I have got to be honest and thank Theresa May for all what she done. I've got to thank her, because without her help, we would never have got help at the last inquest that we got. But what we did achieve, and what's so important for all of you, is not only about the Hillsborough Law, but this is for the good of the whole nation as a whole, as you as individuals, to get the bloody truth in the first place, to get accountability, to get full disclosure. We didn't have that. We were fighting not only the media, not only the people in authority, but we were campaigning to raise funds for the families to help to fight for an injustice that's so corrupt and still going on to this day. What angers me, it's still going on to this day. The corruption within a system needs to be bloody changed. And until we all stick together and stand up, it will never change. Never. But each and every one of you are fighting a campaign. You all deserve to get the truth. You all deserve. The perpetrators seem to get all the help, and the victims don't get bloody bugger all. Well, about time this country changed its ways, make it a level playing field, make sure that they all get the same. The scales are balanced. Balance the scales, because we're down there, they're up there. And to me, for bloody lying, they got rewarded. That angers me to this day. I look at Duckenfield when he was in the court. And the judge, no empathy towards the families who were getting on now, like myself. I was relatively a beautiful woman at one time, you know. I'm telling you all that now. Look what Hillsborough has done to me. It's made me an old bloody woman. But was it worth it? Yes, because what we want for the legacy of R97 is justice, freedom, truth, accountability, honesty, and most important, all of you to get what you rightfully deserve. So back this campaign. Let's hope now the Conservative Party do the most honourable thing that they've never done in all of these 30-odd years, is give the Hillsborough Law a backing along with the Labour Party. Give it. And I don't ask for it. I'm actually bloody demanding it. For all of your sakes, for the future of this country, future of this nation, that not one of you go through what the Hillsborough families have gone through for all of these bloody years. And they kept our mouths shut. Everything we wanted to do. You can't say, don't say nothing. Keep your mouth shut, Margaret. Don't let the family say anything, because there's a case going on. There's a court case going on. I knew it was all kidology. I wanted to have a 30-year memorial service, not just for the families, but for our survivors who suffered so much and went through so much, got the blame. And the big thing we done for them survivors, we got the truth for them. They don't like it. The powers that be don't like it. But the truth is out there that our fans played no part whatsoever in the deaths of their 97. None whatsoever. But all I can say to all of you, please, back the families, back each other. Don't ever give up. If they say no, sorry, you can't go any further. Don't give up. We ended up by not giving up. By fighting, by telling them, no, we've listened to you, you bloody listen to us now for a change. They had to, and we made changes. And let's hope the Hillsborough Law makes changes for each and everybody in this country. Thank you for listening.
I think that's a wonderful way to finish the night, and let's all look forward to tomorrow when Stephen Lee stands up and says it's in the manifesto. But thanks very much for attending tonight, and enjoy the rest of your night.